This next video is specifically related to naming ranges and naming cells, which is a feature not a lot of people know about in Excel. There are some students and test scores. Here I have some Vlookup formulas to the right, which are pulling the students' scores. I will add sums here so that we can see what the total score is for each test. I'm going to pop in an average. This isn't what I'm going to explain, but it'll be relevant when I start doing the named ranges. So here we have students with test scores. We also have their averages to the right. Here we have some areas that are lacking in some information, so number of students. Here I'll use the count A formula, which is counts by the number of non-blank cells in an area. So it should be 10, hopefully. Highest possible score in a test should be 100. So therefore 10 times 100, 1,000 should be the maximum that each test could result in across all students. And then percentage boost, for right now I'll put in 0, but in a second we'll be using that to change some of these test scores. Now here on the right I have Vlookup formulas based on the student pulling their scores. What I'm going to do is copy the names of the students and put them right here, and I'm going to change it so that it runs off of, it's probably hard to see, but instead of running off of B5 it'll now be working off of K5, and now all of these should be working off the second listing of students. That's just so you can see how you can have in a separate area a list of information, student names, and then look up information from a different table, and it'll play into our named ranges in just a second. So, naming a range, or naming a cell. So first I'll do it with a cell since it's easier to understand. Anytime you have any cell reference, let's say this percentage boost cell, C21, you could just use a $ before C and 21, and here in these formulas have it look it up and then add the lookup times the percentage boost, and I will make it $, so it's absolute reference, and that should give us the same thing all the way across, all the way down, because we're at 0%. If I didn't add in the same thing, if I just did multiplied by percentage boost, it would give me a 0. A different way I could do that is instead to have this be 100 and change this to only be the Vlookup times this area. So since it's a little bit easier to understand that way, that's how I'll do it. You can quickly check using our sum formula whether or not this is grabbing the right information. And since all of these match, one easy way to check that is equals, point to a cell, put another equal sign, a different cell, and hit enter. If it comes up as true, then you know that they are the same. And when you drag that across, since they're relative referenced, it'll check all of them. So that's a quick way to just see if you're doing things properly. And so you'll notice that now whenever I change this percentage boost, let's say I wanted to give everyone a 5% boost on their grades. It gets a little wacky with the decimals, but you can see that it looks up in the table, finds what the student's score is, and then adds 5%, or multiplies the whole thing by 105%. In this case we've been using C21. Instead, we could actually name this specific cell something more exciting than C21, and the way to do that is to go to the top left area. This is called the name box. You'll see that pops up. It says C21. Instead, we're just going to call it percentage. All you have to do is type it in. You can't have any spaces. There are some symbols that are not allowed, but as long as you have a continuous word, you can use underscores and then hit enter. Now this cell will be known as percentage. So you'll see actually when I move over to it, it says percentage. It still is C21, but it's also now known as percentage. You'll see there's a drop down here. You can see the other things I've already given names to, but percentage is one of them. And now in the cell here, instead of C21, I could just type in percentage, and you'll see that it's already showing it right here. And whenever something's highlighted below, if you hit tab, it'll insert the rest of it for you. So the VLOOKUP times percentage. That way you wouldn't have to worry about relative or absolute cell referencing, because as you copy it down and across, since it's all percentage, there's no worry about it going to a different cell. You know that it'll always point to that cell. Similarly, you can not only name a cell itself, but you can name a range of cells. So in this formula, we've been looking up, hope you can hear the sirens in the background, we're looking up in this table B5 to H14. Now instead of having B5 to H14 constantly referenced in the Vlookup formulas, we could take B5 to H14, highlight it, go up to the name box, we'll type in student scores, or let's make it student table. Hit enter, and then now each one of these cells is still individually named something else, and B5 to H14 would still work, but when you highlight it, you'll notice it says student table in the top left. And now in the Vlookup formulas, instead of this B5 to H14, which looks pretty gross and not as classy as student table would look, and you'll see how it already shows up, so I'm just going to hit tab to insert it, but you could type out the whole thing. So instead of referring to a specific range of cells, we are naming a range of cells and then referring to that reference. Again, this will give us the same result. It won't change anything, but it'll make the creation of the formulas easier. And now, whenever you look at one of these VLOOKUP formulas, it actually tells you more information. You can see that it's looking up a student table. You can see that it's multiplying by a percentage. And depending on how you name things, or if there's something that you use frequently, it can be very useful so that you don't have to worry about where the cell is or whether or not things are moving around it, as long as you named your range correctly. Now let's say we add another student and then the range is bigger and for some reason it's not included. So if I did it underneath here, I'm not going to make it look pretty for the interest of time, but student 11. So now this area is really what I want to be student table. In these instances, what you can do is go to in the formulas section, name manager, which apparently control F3 also goes to. This will tell you the name, what the values are in it, where it refers to specifically, and additional information, whether you put a comment in or whether it's in the workbook or just a worksheet. And so we're going to modify student table. And so you'll see down here where it says where the reference is, we want it to actually go to row 15. So if we take that and change it, hit enter, now you'll see that it refers to B5 to H15. And so when I copy this down to get student 11, and I give him some scores, he's not very good, so actually it doesn't seem like many people are very good. And you'll notice actually it updated these sums and the average. Depending on which version of Excel you have, it might be pretty intuitive, but as I drag this down, it should do the same thing, and now include student 11 in the table, because previously student table wasn't an option. You can always go to your drop down list and click on any of these and it'll show you exactly where it is, even if it isn't on the current sheet. It'll bring you right to it. So that's a small example of how naming ranges can be useful. They can be used in many different ways, and hopefully throughout further tips and lessons I will explain them in a bit more detail. Thanks.